All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm quite delighted and happy that you came here. My name is Leonie Jansa, and I'm part of the team from Medico International. I work there in the Public Relations Department. And as you might hear, we were going to speak in English mainly in the event. If you need whisper translation in German, then my colleagues there on the back, they will provide German whisper translation. I will just say it in German for those who couldn't understand me in English. Die Veranstaltung wird hauptsächlich auf Englisch stattfinden. Wenn Sie oder ihr deutsche Übersetzung braucht, gibt es da hinten Flüsterübersetzung von meinen beiden Kolleginnen. Genau. And maybe another information, the event will be recorded. It's not a live stream, but it will be recorded. There in the back you can see. So if you don't want to be recorded, then just let my colleagues know, or just make a sign. But mainly we here in the front, we are recorded, so you can relax. Okay. I'm really delighted that you have come here this evening to learn more about the recent judgment of the European Court of Justice in relation to the conflict over Western Sahara. So I'd like to begin with a few words saying about the conflict itself before we go into details, but it will be really shortened. But I thought maybe it might be nice so that everybody can follow the discussion that we're going to have here on the podium. So the territory of Western Sahara has officially been a Spanish colony since 1884. The conquest of Berlin, at which the European powers divided up large parts of Africa among themselves. The other countries, such as Mauritania, Mali, Algeria, Morocco and others, were occupied, colonized, and exploited by France at the same time. In the course of Morocco's independence from France in 1956 and the Algerian struggle for independence from 1954 to 1962, the question of decolonization also arose for Spain and the Western Sahara. In 1973, the Saharaui People's Liberation Organization Frente Polisario was founded and began an uprising to achieve the end of colonial rule and the independence of Western Sahara. 2 years later, in 1975, after the death of Spanish dictator Franco, the Spanish left Western Sahara and Saharawi's goal was within reach. But instead of a liberated Western Sahara, the territory was occupied by Mauritania and Morocco. Sahrawis fought back against the occupying forces. Many of the local Sahrawis fled the area to escape violence and repression, were bombed by Moroccan air forces during the flight, and eventually landed on Algerian territory and set up the refugee camps that still exist today. On 27 February 1976, the Polisario Front proclaimed the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic and established a government in exile in Algeria a few days later. So this was now really a very short account of the events, and we will come back to the impact of the occupation of Western Sahara on the lives and everyday life of the Sahrawi people in the moment. And we will also talk about the extent to which the occupation is linked to the plundering of natural resources, and about exactly which resources are plundered. And just another announcement that I would like to make is about the event and also how this has been organized, because we have great panelists here that I will also present in a minute, but this event was organized by a network of many civil organizations or societies that deal with the effects of the illegal occupation of Western Sahara from different perspectives. And we founded the network in anticipation of the landmark judgments on the trade and fisheries agreement between the European Union and Morocco. And I would like to name the organizations and networks that have been organized this evening and that have had many meetings the last months. because I would really like to value their work. It's for, first of all, the Aktionsgemeinschaft Solidarische Welt, Freiheit für die Westsahara, Jaima de Tiris, Diaspora in Germany, Western Sahara Research Watch, ZEOK, and also Medico International. And we are here now in the building of Medico International, and I would just like to say that Medico International has really a long-standing relation with the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, because Medico has been one of the first German NGOs that supported the Sahrawis since 1974. Medico organized support closely together with the Solidarische movement Society of Friends of Sahrawi People and its succeeding organization Freedom of Western Sahara. Medico always coordinated the assistance and support for medical and food aid in the refugee camps in Nigeria in cooperation with the Algerian and Sahrawi Red Crescent to strengthen their self-governance structures. The aim was also to raise awareness of the disastrous situations of the refugee population in the German public for more support. For many years, Medico supported the Sahrawis with aid through the various co-finance channels. But when the international donors set the population of Sahrawi refugees so low that it was no longer possible to provide for them, Medico withdrew from the direct support to the people in the camps. However, Medico has never withdrawn from solidarity with the Sahrawis, and since advocacy work for Africa's last colony is desperately needed, Medico supports Western Resource Watch. So this was just also to give you kind of an overview about the relationship between the work of Medico International and the Sahrawi population. So tonight, to come to the night after the history talk of myself, sorry for making it long, but I thought it might be also important to have the context of this evening. This evening, we will shed light on the controversial but little-known situation and history of the Western Sahara. This issue returned to the forefront of the European Union on October 4th, when Europe's highest court ruled that trade and fisheries agreement between the European Union and Morocco must not include the occupied Western Sahara. The landmark decision marks a significant victory for the Sahrawi people in their struggle for self-determination. So together tonight with our panelists, we will discuss the opportunities, but also the challenges presented by the legal action. We will explore whether this approach can serve as an effective tool in the resistance and struggle for the Sahrawi people's self-determination. And we will also examine the role of the international community in this unresolved conflict. But now, please let me introduce our panelists. I'm really delighted that you came here from so many different cities. Maybe I'll start by you. Najat Hamdi traveled from Berlin to Frankfurt. She's a representative of the Freedom of Movement Frente Polisario here in Germany. And this movement, Frente Polisario, is a popular movement that has been always striven for the independence of Western Sahara. She has not been only representative of the movement here in Germany, but also in several other European countries before. And Najat works also since many years closely with Medico International together. Thanks for coming here. I'm happy that you're here. Next to you is Eric Hagen. He came from Oslo all the way back here to Frankfurt. Eric is from Norway and is a board member of Western Resource Watch. And he is a director of a Norwegian association that works in solidarity with the Sahrawi people. He has for over 20 years followed the matter of natural resource exploitation in Western Sahara and talk a lot about it, has a lot of knowledge about it. Thanks that you're here. I'm happy that you're here. Thank you. And then finally, Manuel de Ver. He traveled here from Lyon. You were for more than 15 years. You have been providing advice to clients willing to to litigate international law claims for the European courts, with a special emphasis on European Union trade with occupied territories. Manuel de Ver has also experienced before other international courts, such as, for example, the European Court of Human Rights and the African Court on Human and People's Rights. Thanks for coming here, Manuel. Thank you. So I've started already at the beginning saying a few words about the history of Western Sahara, but maybe Najet, you could maybe just explain a bit further, how does the colonization and occupation of Western Sahara affect the life and everyday life of people living in these territories?
Danke für die Frage. Guten Abend. Bevor ich anfange, die Frage zu beantworten, möchte ich daran erinnern, dass es heute, vor 49 Jahren, die Invasion in der Westsahara angefangen hat. Genau am 31. Oktober 1975 hat Marokko die Stadt Mahbes angegriffen und besetzt. Ja, und seitdem natürlich gab es eine große Veränderung, eine Etappe, die das Leben der Menschen, das Leben dieser ganzen Volk von heute auf morgen auf den Kopf gestellt hat. Es gab viele Veränderungen, tiefgreifende Veränderungen. Die Leute wurden bombardiert, vertrieben, viele Menschen mussten fliehen, mit dem Ergebnis, dass seit dieser Zeit Tausende von Menschen in den Flüchtlingslagern in Südwestalgerien bis heute leben. Es wurde eine Mauer gebaut, die man auch unbedingt erwähnen muss, weil das betrifft das Leben und die Situation der Saharaui heute. Es gibt Saharaui, die jenseits dieser Mauer leben. Wir nennen das Mauer der Schande, und das ist eine Mauer, die 2700 Kilometer lang, die zweitlängste nach China Mauer. Eine Mauer, die das Leben der Familie, die Menschenrechte verletzt in der Westsahara. Familien sind zerrissen, verteilt seit ungefähr 50 Jahren. Die Menschen, die westlich dieser Mauer leben, leben in den besetzten Gebieten der Westsahara. Diese Menschen sind tagtäglich Repressalien ausgesetzt. Sie sind unterdrückt. Wenn Menschen für das Selbstbestimmungsrecht oder die Unabhängigkeit der Westsahara stehen, stellen sie das ganze Leben in Gefahr. Also die werden gefoltert, verhaftet. Es gibt dort keine Meinungsfreiheit. Es gibt unter anderem auch durch die Mauer Bewegung, also eine große Verletzung der Bewegungsfreiheit in der Westsahara, weil diese Mauer unpassierbar ist. Und die Menschen werden auch nicht nur politisch oder rechtlich ihre Rechte verletzt, sondern auch kulturell. Die saharauische Identität wird tagtäglich von Marokkanern oder von diesem Regime in Marokko angegriffen. Die Menschen wiederum, die auf der anderen Seite, östlich der Mauer, entweder leben sie in den befreiten Gebieten der Westsahara, das ist ungefähr 25% des Landes, oder leben sie in Flüchtlingslager, die meisten leben in Flüchtlingslager. Und dort ist das Leben auch sehr hart. Es ist sehr, sehr schwierige Bedingungen. Menschen, die in Flüchtlingslager leben, sind 100% abhängig von der internationalen Hilfe. Stellen Sie sich das vor, diese Menschen kommen aus einem der reichsten Länder dieser Welt. Und trotzdem leben sie halt abhängig von der internationalen Hilfe. Also im Großen und Ganzen kann ich sagen, dass mit dem Anfang der Besatzung das Leben der Menschen hat sich verschlechtert, die sowieso während der Kolonialzeit nicht das Beste war. Ich meine, aber das kennen Sie, wenn man unter einer Kolonialmacht lebt und als Mensch zweiter Klasse in seinem eigenen Land lebt. Aber die Invasion war noch ein Faktor, der diese ganze Situation verschlechtert hat. Ja, und diese Situation ist andauernd bis heute. Die saharauische Menschenrechte werden verletzt, rechtlich, politisch, kulturell. Das ist die Situation der Menschen, die unter Besatzung leben und unter Kolonialismus.
Ja, vielen Dank. Thank you very much. I think we're gonna talk further about the situation of people living there in those occupied territories, but also in the refugee camps. But I would like to ask you, Eric, first. So, as mentioned already, there's plundering happening of natural resources. How is this linked to the occupation? Could you elaborate a bit more on that, and which resources exactly are plundered?
Thank you. Thank you for this important event. We follow, our organization would follow all sorts of foreign involvement in the territory, on the private level, government level. It is because we believe that the resources play today a role in the conflict. We believe that as long as Morocco has access to these resources and use them and connect them to global companies and governments, we will not find a solution to the conflict. The resources play a political role. A political role in normalizing the occupation by attracting foreign governments. They would treat the territory as if it were a part of Morocco. But also even more, just as complicated as the demographic consequences. Through the resources, Morocco is able to attract its own citizens into the territory. You would say, or Morocco, or the companies would say, we contribute to the development of the region. We contribute to the economic, financial development of the region. That's the narrative of the companies and of the investors. And in a way that's correct, but it's the Moroccan government's development. It's not the development that the Sahrawis want. They want access to their own land and they want to choose these things themselves. They don't want to see Moroccan institutions, Moroccan ports, Moroccan schools, Moroccan curriculums or whatever, taxation programs or whatever in the territory. So those two aspects are important. There is also a certain financial aspect. I don't see that as the most important. The occupation is very costly, and I think also the Moroccan people deserve to know how costly it is. I don't have the number myself, but I mean, militarily, the surveillance, the lobby, the subsidy programs, and they have to pay that in one way or the other, and the resources contribute to foot that bill. It will be interesting to know to what extent. I don't have the figures for that, but it does. There is a financial element to it, particularly in the fisheries, but also in the non-renewable resources. So that's where, over to that second part of the question, which resources? You have some of the world's best fish stocks on this side of the African continent. Normally small sorts of fish, sardines, anchovies, mackerel. They are caught by international fishing companies, mostly European until recently, mostly Spanish until recently, but also the Russians are quite involved, some Asian countries are involved, and a big Moroccan local fleet. And those small fish are then either exported directly, frozen, to an African continent or through Eastern Europe. And some are processed. This is a brutal thing. This applies to the whole West African region. You turn fish food into fish feed. So you take human food, sardines, anchovies, mackerel, bongo, and you turn it into oil in a factory. And then you export that oil to France or Denmark or Norway or UK to produce salmon. So that's at least something we do a lot in my country, is to try to expose when we produce salmon in Norway, it's not really food production, it's food displacement. So there's a correlation between the lack of access to fish in Mauritania, Senegal, the whole fish stocks, and the salmon production in the north. So that's a big industry. Then you have some canned fish. So the fish is exported into Europe. That's a big industry. Turkey is the biggest importer of fish meal. We're talking in gigantic volumes of fish exported to Turkey in bags, in flour bags. Fish meal, you know what I mean? It comes in, it looks like flour from the shop. Then in addition you have the second biggest industry is the phosphates. Phosphate rock is a mineral used to produce fertilizers. And that is transported on ships to, traditionally half has ended up in North America. Now the biggest importer is Mexico, and then India, and some to New Zealand. So these three countries take in basically all of it. There will be a shift in this sector within a year or two when Morocco has completed a factory, a phosphate or a fertilizer is used for agriculture production. A fertilizer factory will be completed in Western Sahara within a year or two. Then we will see more countries involved in that part of the plunder. So those two segments are the biggest. Now, the last decade we've seen explosive growth in Morocco's renewable energy programs, sun and wind. And through those programs, Morocco is able to, it's fascinating, to drag Western Sahara, the controversial parts of Western Sahara, into the ethical debates as something positive. Like, for the greater good, we are developing renewable energy. So they're taking what is a human rights international law violation and they're switching it over to something positive. It's a remarkable PR stunt. And in that context, we see heavy involvement of the Germans. We see most of the Western European countries involved in this renewable front. In Germany, we have had, I'm about to wrap up, we've had involvement on several fronts. It is, on renewables, we've had Siemens Energy, Siemens Gamesa. We've had one company that pulled out quite recently, Continental, the rubber company, pulled out from the phosphate mine. That was good, really good, well done. We've had a lot of imports of, some imports of fish meal into Bremen. Custard marine protein in Bremen is the hub of fish meal in Europe. So some of it ends up there. We've had Heidelberg Cement, who is producing cement, which is quite controversial. We had quite a lot of shipping companies, Hamburg shipping companies, mostly. We have a certification company from Cologne, I think, TUV, Rhineland. We've had, what else do we have? Oh, there's so much. ThyssenKrupp, yeah, ThyssenKrupp built originally the, well, they've done two things. They originally constructed the conveyor belt, which is seen on the picture by the entrance. A conveyor belt that transports the minerals from the mine out to the coast. That is originally constructed by ThyssenKrupp for the Spanish 50 years ago. And then ThyssenKrupp has taken part in the establishment or building of a cement factory a couple of years back as well. So they have these two large infrastructure programs. And then we have the banking sector, which is quite big, where all large European banks are in one way or the other involved, and I'm sure that you will be able to find some kind of connection between you and your family and some sort of fund or pension scheme that you are involved in through your employer or personally. So that's also something important that we need to address. Anyway, thank you. And then we have fishing as well. Large fishing companies involved. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric, for for those very detailed information. I think we're going to come back to this in a minute, but it's getting quite obvious that the exploitation of natural resource plays a really crucial role in the Western Sahara occupation. But there has been now on the 4th of October, as I mentioned already, this year, quite an important judgment by the European Court of Justice. It has been announced that there was a judgment in the appeal proceedings on the extension of the economic agreements between the European Union and Morocco. And in its judgment, the court rejects all the European Union's appeals. The trade and fisheries agreements between the European Union and Morocco concerning the territory must be terminated within 1 year. And now, Emmanuel, you are here, and you are the lawyer of Frente Polisario, and I would ask you if you could describe a bit more in detail how this court judgment came about and which parties have been involved, and could you also explain a bit more how does this court judgment of the 4th of October this year fit into the series of the judgment that were made already in 2016, 2018, 2021?
Well, good evening to all. Thank you very much for having me. Just to tell you a little bit about the rulings, I think that's important for the audience to have information on the background of the cases. The background is that when Spain withdrew from Western Sahara, made some deals with Morocco to keep an access to the natural resources and the fishing resources. And when Spain became a member state of the European Union in 1986, the EU took over the Spanish-Morocco fishery partnership agreement that were covering the waters of Western Sahara. And since then, all the fishery partnership concluded between the EU and Morocco have been applied to Western Sahara. In the terms of the treaty, the agreement would only refer to Morocco, the territory of Morocco, or Moroccan waters. But in practice, those agreements were made with Morocco to be applied mostly to Western Sahara because of the fishing stock of the coast. So that's the first information that is important. The second one is that, as you said, there was a ceasefire that was concluded in 1991. And already in 1993, the European Commission, because of the ceasefire, was able to go to the occupied part of Western Sahara and to deliver some agreements to processing companies that would transform fishery products that could be then exported to the European markets. In 1993, there were only 3 establishments. Now there are about 150 establishments that are located in occupied Western Sahara. That's 1/3 of the entire Moroccan establishments. We have the numbers now, we did not before. The amount of fishery products that are exported from occupied Western Sahara to the European market, that's 420 million euros of value per year. There is another number that is important that concerns the agricultural product that started in 2005. That's 80 million euros of values of products that are exported to the European markets. So on average, Morocco is able to export €500 million of values of goods to the European markets. To give you a point of comparison, we have some numbers that are unofficial regarding the settlements in occupied Palestine, and that's 230 million euros of values per year, okay? And so for me, as the lawyer, looking at the facts, that's very clear that the main obstacle to the self-determination of the Sahrawi people was the involvement of the EU. Because of the involvement of the EU in the occupied part of Western Sahara, Morocco was able to develop the economy there, to provide jobs to Moroccan settlers, and then to modify the demographic composition of the territory. Now, the EU is a rule of law, is an organization that is based on the rule of law. So the Commission had to come with an explanation to give the appearance that actually they were abiding with international law. And so they used a legal opinion that was made by a UN legal advisor in 2002, Hans Corel, that said basically that there could be some exploitation of the natural resources in Western Sahara if that was in consultations with the Sahrawi people. Okay, so with them, not something else. And the Commission misinterpreted that legal opinion to develop the fact that the exploitations was possible, so that de facto application of the EU and Morocco agreement to Western Sahara was possible if that was beneficial to the local population, not the people, and treated Morocco as the de facto administering power of Western Sahara. that is a quality that only Spain is basically building. You know, as France is the administrator of New Caledonia, Spain used to be the administrating power of Western Sahara, and Morocco, that has no title to administer the territory, occupies Western Sahara according to their chain. And so that's the background, how we found the case when we started. As I explained for the Polisario Front, that was a huge problem because the Polisario Front saw the political involvement of the EU in Western Sahara, but also the numbers of the resources that were taken out of the territory and sent to the ship to the European markets. And so we started the first round of litigation, there are two of them, in 2012, where we challenged a free trade agreement, if you want, to the association agreement, that is another free trade agreement, that concerns preferential tariff treatment. You're based in a third country, you don't want to pay the customs, the duties, and you have an agreement that provides for an exemption. So we started with that first case in November 2012, and there was a second case regarding the fishery partnership agreement. And that first round of litigation led to a ruling in 2016, December, that is actually the key of our work, really the cornerstone of what we're doing, where the European Court of Justice, which is the higher body, judicial body in Europe, ruled on two important things. The first one, the court ruled that Western Sahara, according to the principle of self-determination, has a separate and distinct status. So it means that that's a different country from Morocco, and that Morocco has no sovereignty over Western Sahara. Recognizing the separate and distinct status of Western Sahara is recognizing the territorial component of the right to self-determination of the Sahrawi people. For me, that's something that is important when you come to speak about Western Sahara. The right to self-determination that is sometimes presented as being a political principle, something devoid of legal content, very unclear, is actually extremely clear. The right to self-determination, that's four components. The first one, that's the right to freely determine your political status. Do you want independence or something else? And in Western Sahara, that's the main question. But there are other components of the rights. One of them is territorial integrity. This is the territory of the Sahrawi people. And so that's the separate and distinct status. The second aspect is the right to national unity. When you refer to the Sahrawi people, you have to call them people. They are people under international law as much as the French people, the German people, or any other people in the world. The fourth component is the right to permanent sovereignty over the natural resources. The resources that are in Western Sahara belong to the Sahrawi people and no one else. So, on the first aspect of the ruling, the court ruled that Western Sahara has a separate and distinct status so that the territory actually belongs to the Sahrawi people. And then, the court ruled on another aspect that is actually even more important to us, that is the right to consent. The court ruled that the Sahrawi people are third party to the EU-Morocco relations, and that for any agreement, any dealing that covers Western Sahara or the natural resources, you need the consent of the Sahrawi people, regardless of the benefits. And so for us, that's actually the key, and I must say, as a lawyer, I'm really proud of that result, because with the consent, you empower the Sahrawi people to decide. Without the consent, you only have a reading that is based on benefit. That is actually a colonialist argument. Us, European powers, we know better what is good for you or not. With the consent, that's yes or no. And if the Polisario Front, representing the Sahrawi people, opposed to the agreements are illegal, and any resources that are taken out of the territory without Sahrawi consent, that's stolen goods. So that's the first ruling we got. When we started the litigation, we had two things in mind. Mostly is that the court is, the European Court of Justice is open to international arguments, so that's why we came to the European Court of Justice. But we are also precedent in the case of the courts that concern Palestine, where actually there was the same issue of the Israeli authorities applying the EU-Israel Association Agreement to occupy Palestine. And the court said already in 2012, that's the Brita case, no, you can't do it. You can't do that because the Palestinian people are a third party to the EU-Israeli relations, and so you need Palestinian consent. And so for us, when we started the litigation, one of the objectives was to obtain the acknowledgement of the status of the territory of Western Sahara under international law. That is not a disputed territory, that's a territory that is well defined and has a separate and distinct status. The second thing was to get rid of that benefit theory to impose the consent of the Sahrawi people as the sole criterion. Honestly, after the rulings, given the practice of the EU toward occupied Palestine, there is an association agreement between the EU and the PLO. We thought that it would stop there and there would be a political dialogue between EU institutions and the police of France. Instead of that, the Commission decided to renegotiate the association agreement and the fishery partnership agreement to cover explicitly Western Sahara. Now the court said, you need the consent. So they had to come up with a new theory, a new argument, to explain that actually we respect the consent of the Sahrawi people. And so they made consultation with the concerned populations. And the concerned populations, that's where actually mostly Moroccan institutions, Moroccan settlers, no Sahrawi involved in the occupied parts, and totally excluding the refugees in the camps. And so we went back to court with no option. And we got the last ruling that I'm now talking about, where the court reaffirmed the previous finding in its previous ruling, saying that Western Sahara has a separate and distinct status and you need consent. But the court added three other things. First of all, the court ruled that the police of France, as the UN recognized representative of the Sahrawi people, are standing before your court to bring claims, any claims that relates to the self-determination process in Western Sahara when there is EU involvement. So now the EU institutions, politicians, they know that if they try again to circumvent the rulings of the courts, the police of France has a direct access to courts. With that first finding, we can say that now the Sahrawi people are under the protection of the European Court of Justice in Europe. The second thing is that the court ruled that this time it ruled explicitly that the Sahrawi people have the right to permanent sovereignty over the natural resources. So before we had the territorial component, now we have the natural resources component. The last aspect that is extremely important for us on that consultation process, the court acknowledged the right to national unity of the Sahrawi people, and it ruled that actually, given the demographic engineering of the occupying forces in occupied Western Sahara, there is only actually 1/4 of the population that is Sahrawi. All the other inhabitants are not Sahrawis, they are not part of the Sahrawi people, and most of the Sahrawi people is actually based in the refugee camp. It means that if you want to get Sahrawi consent, you have to talk to that part of the population that is mostly in the refugee camps. On the finding of the ruling, the conclusion of the court, where the court confirmed the nullification of the agreements that were decided by the General Court. So currently, there is no fishery partnership agreement. That's the first time in 40 years. We still have the preferential tariff treatment agreement, but for a short period of time of 12 months. That is, for me, just the period of time for the European Commission to pull out from Western Sahara. And then to conclude maybe on that, I really want to underline the significance of the ruling. First of all, that's the first time in the history of the organization that a national liberation movement representing the colonial people goes to court and win its cases. All the other cases that were brought by national liberation movement were dismissed. The second thing is that on the right to self-determination, we have many opinions from the International Court of Justice that are significant on Palestine, Namibia, Western Sahara, Chagos. The rulings of the court, that's the first time that we have binding rulings on the right to self-determination as an operative right under EU law. The first aspect is that that's the first time actually that a court, a domestic court, regional court, accept to nullify international agreements because they are violating the right to self-determination. And so, beyond the issue of Western Sahara, the prospects are huge because actually the court accepted to subordinate the interest of international trade to human rights. And that we owe it to the Sahrawi people, to the police of France, that took on themselves to go to court, whereas EU politicians in Europe failed to defend the rule of law, because in 2016 they should have said, that's enough, the ruling of the court are clear, there must be Sahrawi consent. And for the people that know me and that have been following the issue, since 2016, we say to all politicians, all decision makers and businessmen in Western Sahara, make your agreement, we will go back to court and we will nullify those agreements because there is a framework, separate and distinct status and consent. If you don't have the consent of the Sahrawi people, you have to leave the territory.
Thanks very much, Manuel, for so those clear words, but also for the legal background, or the contextualization of the different court cases. And thanks very much for that. You mentioned now already, and there's a question for you, Najat, the importance of those court cases for resistance of the Sahrawi people. And I would like to ask you, Najat, to what extent do you see such court judgment as an opportunity of self-determination for the Sahrawi people? And maybe can you also tell a bit more what kind of other forms of resistance exist in this tireless struggle of the Sahrawi people?
Danke für die Frage. Also dieser rechtliche Beschluss ist sicherlich ein für uns historischer Erfolg, denn gerade was die Frage angeht, was Selbstbestimmungsrecht betrifft, was eigentlich bekannt ist seit den 60er Jahren bei der UN in Resolution 1514 bekannt, nochmal in unserem Fall jetzt betont durch diese gerichtlichen Verhandlungen. Das ist ein politischer Erfolg. Es ist natürlich ein juristischer, hat auch wirtschaftlichen Einfluss, aber es ist vor allem ein politischer Erfolg, denn wir in der Frente Polisario, die Sahrawi, kämpfen in der ersten Stelle für die Unabhängigkeit unseres Landes und kämpfen dafür, dass eigentlich uns ein Recht zugesprochen wird, was alle anderen Völker auch davon profitiert haben. Aber uns ist leider, dass bis jetzt durch die Arbeit von Marokko, bis jetzt sind wir nicht dazu gekommen, dass wir ein Referendum organisieren, dass wir das Selbstbestimmungsrecht unserer Volk genießen. Und dieses Erfolg, ich möchte einfach nochmal das betonen, was gerade Manuel gesagt hat, für die Organisation der Frente Polisario, die nochmal bestätigt, dass sie die Vertreterin, politische Vertreterin der Interessen des saharauischen Volkes, was uns natürlich auch Türen öffnen für die Zukunft. Ich meine, jetzt war die Anklage gegen die Europäische Kommission und Rat und einige europäische Länder, aber diese Position, die wir jetzt erlangen haben, können wir die auch in der Zukunft nutzen. Deswegen denke ich, das ist ein sehr, sehr Faktor, die Betonung, dass niemand unsere Ressourcen nochmal einfach ausbeutet ohne unsere Zustimmung, das, was wir immer gesagt haben. Also wir wollen nicht, dass deutsche Firmen dort arbeiten, wir wollen nicht, dass andere europäische Firmen dort unsere Bodenschätze ausbeuten. Und wir haben immer gesagt, das darf eigentlich nicht ohne unsere Zustimmung. Und hier finde ich auch sehr wichtig zu betonen, dass es nicht einfach von den Bewohnern des Landes, wo viele sind Siedler, gesprochen, sondern nochmal das saharauische Volk, was eigentlich sehr, sehr wichtig für uns und was es auch politisch, eine andere politische Komponente hat, als jetzt die Bewohner, also die Siedler, die Sahraui und so weiter. Also diese Trennung ist sehr wichtig und es ist sehr wichtig, dass wir nach diesem Beschluss jetzt wissen, dass das, was Marokko immer versucht uns zu verkaufen seit Jahren, dass dieser Konflikt ist ein regionaler Konflikt. Das muss in eine regionale Vorschlag oder auf regionale Basis gelöst wird. Marokko hat immer versucht, andere Länder mit einzubeziehen. Jetzt ist es klar, jede Ausbeutung bedarf die Zustimmung des saharauischen Volkes. Nicht andere Länder in der Region, nicht jemand andere. Und das betont wiederum, dass Selbstbestimmung reicht. Also das ist für uns sehr, sehr wichtig, weil das macht diese ganzen Argumente, was Marokko in den letzten Jahren, vor allem in den ganz letzten Monate und Tage versucht hat, es macht diese Argumente nackt, sagt man, kann man das auf Deutsch sagen? Also macht sie zunichte eigentlich, diese ganze Propaganda. Und nochmal vielleicht zu dem, was du, Manuel, gerade erwähnt hast, mit dieser de facto Geschichte. Ich bin keine Juristin, aber was ich weiß als jemand, der sich nicht jetzt juristisch ist, ich weiß, dass Marokko das gar nicht will. Das ist ein Problem. Marokko sieht Westsahara als ein integraler Teil seines Territoriums. Also auch wenn Spanien die Administrationspower ist, aber Marokko will das gar nicht. Das heißt, er wäre gar nicht in der Lage, auch die Verpflichtungen, die damit verbunden sind, wahrzunehmen oder zu beantworten, weil Marokko Westsahara eigentlich als sein eigenes Territorium, was nicht wahr ist, das wird auch jetzt nochmal klar und deutlich durch diesen Beschluss, denn das Gericht sieht Westsahara und Marokko als zwei separate, voneinander getrennte Länder. Also Abkommen, die für Marokko gelten, müssen nicht unbedingt in der Westsahara auch gelten. Und ich glaube, das stärkt natürlich unsere Position. Es ist ein Mittel, mit dem wir arbeiten, nochmal zurückzukommen, wie wichtig diese Beschlüsse, auch wenn wir wussten, dass wir Selbstbestimmungsrecht, dass wir Recht darauf haben, aber nochmal von einem europäischen Gericht zu bestätigen, das ist natürlich ein wichtiger Erfolg. Und das ist auch ein Mittel, mit dem wir die Saharauis, die Frente Polisario, aber auch wir, alle Freundinnen und Organisationen, die mit uns arbeiten, als neue Mittel, um die EU unter Druck zu setzen, um diese Länder, die die Westsahara ausbeuten, unter Druck zu setzen. Denn diese Ausbeutung, das hat doppelt eigentlich Effekt auf uns. Es ist nicht nur die Ausbeutung, dass die Ressourcen beraubt werden, sondern die Gelder, die davon Marokko bekommt, werden ja gegen uns benutzt. In seiner Lobbyarbeit, in seinen Spionagenaktionen, in seiner Siedlungspolitik. Und das ist sehr gefährlich. Also wir haben nichts von den Ressourcen und man arbeitet mit den Ressourcen gegen uns. Und das ist sehr, sehr gefährlich. Muss ich? Ja, also kurz gesagt, also es ist ein sehr wichtiger, sehr historischer Erfolg für uns, die nochmal neue Sachen klargestellt hat. Einige waren bekannt, einige sind neu, die sind sehr, sehr wichtig und ich hoffe nur, dass die Länder, die Europäische Union und die Länder in Europa das auch genauso lesen und interpretieren, wie es gemeint ist. Und das ist die Gefahr, die die Geschichte uns gezeigt hat bis jetzt. Aber auf jeden Fall haben wir jetzt eine neue Waffe, wenn ich in militärischer Sprache spreche, die wir nutzen können gegen jeder, der unsere Bodenschätze ausbeuten möchte.
Okay, thank you very much, Nadette, for celebrating maybe kind of also the decision that has been made by the European Court. So resources, Eric, you elaborated and spoke already about the exploitation and plundering of resources in Western Sahara, and you also already mentioned some German companies or even European companies involved in the exploitation. But I would like to ask you to explain a bit more in detail to what extent German and European companies are involved in that, and what's so specific about the Western Sahara case, if I may say it so, because we also know that looting and resource exploitation are happening in many different African countries as well. So, maybe you could explain a bit further, a bit more about this, and maybe also by having in mind the court case that has been just decided on the 1st of October.
Yeah, you could say that there is a looting or misuse of resources or land in many poor countries by European governments or companies. The particular point here is that it is done in cahoots with the wrong government, which is not normal any other place. I mean, it's actually many of the companies talking in the same way. They would address the problematic or the aspects of human rights or law in Western Sahara as they do elsewhere. So they would talk about, like Siemens does, they would talk about operations in Western Sahara in the same framework, understanding as they would do with indigenous peoples in Brazil or settled farmers in Tanzania. You know, now I'm just saying examples. But they would address it through the same tradition that they're used to, local stakeholder consultations with the local populations. But that kind of ignores the whole fact that they are there on an illegal agreement with the wrong government. So they go about this in the whole wrong way. And it's something I particularly liked with what you said. It's a colonialistic way of doing business. We know what's best for you. This is how Siemens would talk. We know we contribute to the development of the region. We create local employment, as if Siemens knows what the Sahrawis want, and they will have to ask them to know what they want. This is how we colonized Africa 150 years ago. We knew what kind of civilization or god or language or jurisdiction they were supposed to have. Decided here in Europe. Then we had the self-determination concept after the Second World War and the establishment of the UN, and that's the whole idea of self-determination that then the governments and the companies failed to really understand. So, yeah. So we have these. So what else do we have of the company approach? It seems it's so weird how they fail to really grasp the main concept. Some of these companies, they go to their government. So you have the German companies going to the German government, and they ask for advice. And how do we approach the business opportunities in Western Sahara? And then the governments are too damn scared to come with a clear advice because they have to balance different political considerations, and they don't come with clear advice to their companies. So they would just leave it to the companies themselves to conclude. So the governments are nowhere the companies would, yeah. But now, particularly in France, now I'm pointing at you. Sorry. So we have three presidents who say Western Sahara is part of Morocco. It's Trump, Netanyahu, and Macron. Macron recognized Western Sahara as part of Morocco this week. It's insane. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of France announced, we have hereby removed Western Sahara from the map. So Western Sahara has been deleted from the maps of the French government. It's just insane. So anyway, so in those contexts, how can you actually have French companies getting any advice from the French government when the government is absolutely ignoring international law and human rights? So the company, and this is actually the fun part or interesting part of our methodology, we think that the companies are vulnerable in a way that the government is not. The government will always get away with some lies, or they have many things to consider in migration and anti-terrorism or climate or whatever, but the companies, they just want to earn money. And we can pressure companies until they depart. And that's our methodology. Every single company is weak if you compare it to a government. We can tilt any company in the world. You just need to find the arguments, find the pressure points, go to the trade unions, to the owners, to the insurance company, to the auditor, to the social media, to the hashtags. You can take down any company you like. It's remarkable. They are really, really fragile. And with this legal development, absolutely so. Now, I completely forgot what you asked about. So I just talk.
Yeah, I asked about if you could maybe explain a bit more what's, I mean, you started already explaining what's the problem of exploitation of the special case of plundering resources in Western Sahara, but I would also like to ask you if you could give some examples of companies from Germany or for the European Union who are exactly plundering resources.
Right. Well, it's easy to talk about the plunder, and I think most of the Sahrawis as well refer to what's going on as the plunder. And I think that kind of takes away what I think is the most serious business, which is the infrastructure, which is not necessarily plunder. So the plunder means taking the minerals, exploring the oil, taking out the fish, and in that you have a set of importing companies, shipping companies, exporting companies, and certification companies, and insurance, maritime insurance. You have a whole range of companies involved in the plunder. But for me, the more important is the infrastructure, which is another set of type of companies which contribute to building ports, building roads, building electrical infrastructure, banking system, and in there you have many of the German companies. You know, Heidelberg Cement is not necessarily a plunder company, it's an infrastructure company. So we need to address it, for us, we address it as a problem of lack of consent. It's the Sahrawis' decision to deal with the building of the infrastructure. It's not a matter of Sahrawis losing so much the resources. That's also interesting, but it's for us, we are framing it more in the matter of its development the Sahrawis are not accepting, at least from what we understand. At least they haven't been asked. And in there you have then the large infrastructure companies, telecom, cables that are being laid. Now, a huge program now is to build a transmission cable from Western Sahara to Morocco, a gigantic, is it 2-3 gigawatt cable that will connect the electricity grid of Western Sahara to Morocco. It means that the electricity systems will be completely integrated, as opposed to until today, where the local electricity has to a large extent been used for the local Moroccan end-use industries of cement or phosphate exports. So now it will all be connected. And any now cooperation with the Moroccan electricity system will be, in a way, also the Sahrawi. It's now basically becoming impossible to cooperate with the Moroccan government on renewables or electricity without, in one way or the other, using or applying it partially to Western Sahara. The German government is really interested in Morocco's renewable energy. Paradoxically, that shift came to distance itself from the Russian gas supplies. At least you can partially explain that. Distance itself from the Russian gas, meaning you need to find renewable sources elsewhere, and the German interest in renewables came, you know, post invasion of Ukraine in Morocco. At least it grew from there. And the announcement, the horrible announcement from the Green Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany on the recognition of the Moroccan so-called autonomy plan about 2-3 years back came in the same line of argument as we need to cooperate with Morocco on renewables. So it's the same package. So the greater good kind of argument. That was disappointing. I'm not shocked to see Macron recognizing Western Sahara as part of Morocco, but I was really shocked to see a Green Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany saying that the Moroccan approach to the conflict is good. That was for me shocking. more shocking. So there you go. So in renewable, that's the big money now. Huge. Green hydrogen. That's I'm not really understood yet what it means. Green hydrogen, but it's the new front on renewables, new technology, and lots of money involved. And that's also where Germany has shown interest in Westsahara.
Thank you, Eric, very much for mentioning some companies, but also for showing up or explaining how maybe the interest has been changing over the years of the German companies, but also from different European countries. Before we're going to open for questions from your side, from the audience, or comments, I'd like to ask to all of you one question and ask you for just a short answer, because I understood now that mainly the three of you celebrate the court case that has been, or the judgment that court judgment that has been published on the 4th of October. But would you then say that legal processes legal process is a means of resistance in general, and especially an anti-colonial resistance, specifically in the case of the occupation of the Western Sahara? Or what are the advantages and disadvantages of those legal processes as an instrument kind of resistance? Maybe you can start.
Ich glaube, Manuel kann das ein bisschen beantworten, aber ich versuche das zumindest, wie ich das verstehe. Ich denke schon, dass das ein sehr, sehr wichtiges Mittel des Kampfes. Wir, die Sahrawi, kämpfen ja auch nicht nur juristisch und warten. Das ist einer der Kampf, den wir ziemlich spät angefangen haben. Wir kämpfen militärisch, politisch, sozial und so weiter. Aber dieser Kampf bietet uns noch neue Möglichkeiten, weil wir immer noch denken, dass vor allem jetzt die Situation mit dem Europäischen Gerichtshof, wir denken, oder besser gesagt, wir hoffen, dass man in Europa immer noch diese Rechte, die Länder, die Völker hier für sich zu schreiben, auch auf der anderen Seite diese Erde gelten. Und deswegen denken wir, dass es zumindest, wir sind oft belehrt, wenn wir aus Afrika zum Beispiel jetzt herkommen, dass alles ist in Anklang mit Menschenrechten, mit Ordnung, mit Recht und so weiter. Und jetzt haben wir Mittel, die zeigen, okay, Europa, die Länder in Europa, die brechen tagtäglich Rechts und die benehmen sich eigentlich, oder die beuten unsere Ressourcen illegal, arbeiten mit dem Aggressor und jetzt gibt es Mittel. Das ist illegal, laut europäischem Recht. Also werden Sie das respektieren oder nicht? Das ist die Frage.
Yeah, okay, great. Najat invited you already to react on the question. Maybe you would like to say a few words on that.
Just a couple of thoughts and comments. The first thing is that clearly now using litigation as a tool for emancipation works. It works now because we have international courts that are functional, independent, and to which we have an access. Now telling you that when the member states establish through the Treaty of Roma, the European communities at that time thought that some days there would be a colonial people represented by a national liberation movement able to find its way to courts. Well, but now they exist. The only thing, so I think that's a very powerful tool, but they are also can be a dangerous tool, in the sense that the first aspect of it is that when you start litigation, you bear the risk of litigation. You're the applicant, you can lose the case. You can lose the case because you miss the technical arguments, because you're not fully aware of the case of the court, because you missed the deadline. And so I think that was the bet of the institutions in 2016, 2018, saying, but the lawyers of the Polisario Front, the Sahrawi leadership, they will get tired. They will not have the consistency to go back to court and to present the legal argumentation at the right level. So litigation is dangerous. The second thing with litigation is that at the end of the day, my perspective is that I'm a lawyer, I'm not a diplomat, I'm not a politician. I think there is a political question to solve in Western Sahara. That is for politicians, for political leaders, in particular the police of France. Us as lawyers, our work is mainly to restore the balance, recall what's the legal framework applicable to the question of Western Sahara. But there is a tendency sometimes that I see with activists or even sometimes with politicians, what is called strategic litigation. It's that, oh, we have a problem or you know, human rights situation, let's go to court. That's more complicated than that. If you lose, that can be very detrimental to the cause that you are supporting to defend. And then also, I see that as a lawyer, is that as a lawyer, that's very comfortable to be sitting in the world of the law. Because you don't talk about the factual situation. You know, the legal language is becoming very technical, and you forget about the broader picture of the situation. And us, the case was technical because that was purely about euro. I could talk about that. That's extremely complicated. But the Commission, the Council, they were talking about fishing rights, custom duties, things like that. Us, at every moment, we always keep in mind the fact that there is a wall that divides the territory in two, which means that divides the family in two, that there are political prisoners, refugees for more than 50 years, and people in the occupied part that are subjected to massive human rights violations. And so when you do litigation, you have always to keep in mind the background of the situation, because human beings, the human mind, we don't want to see the crime. And so in that sense, that's very comfortable to do litigation because you forget about that. The last thing maybe that I wanted to tell about the emancipation, regarding what you said about the involvement of France now in Western Sahara, regarding the rulings that were delivered on the 4th of October, I forgot to mention one ruling that arrived, that's a case that arrived before the court because of what we call the preliminary ruling. So litigation was started at the domestic level in France, because in the case there was an issue of euro, the case was sent to the European Court of Justice that had to rule on it. And so in that case, that was the Confédération Paysanne, so farmers of peasants, if you want, that started a case against the French authorities to obtain a prohibition to import products from Western Sahara, agricultural products, that are mislabeled. Because all the exports that are coming from Western Sahara, they are presented as Moroccan products. And in the ruling of the court said what we expected. Western Sahara has a separate and distinct status. The products are grown in Western Sahara, so they are of a Sahrawi origin. And if you want to market them, to sell them in Europe, you need the Sahrawi origin to appear on the packaging. And that ruling of the court actually relied on its previous case law on Palestine regarding the product from the settlements. Now, going back to Macron, what's going to be very interesting is that there were announcements that were made 2 days ago, even some maps that were corrected, but now that the case has been ruled by the court, it will go back to French administrative courts, and the French administrative court, so the Conseil d'État, which is the supreme administrative court, will say that as regards EU law, Western Sahara has a separate and distinct status. That's not a Moroccan territory. So the question then, in legal terms, in political terms, is what is the value of all the announcements that were made by Macron, knowing actually that there is a preemption date that is the final ruling coming from the Conseil d'État. So for us, I must say, we are optimistic about the next steps. The only thing is always to use litigation as something meaningful and not to lose the broader picture.
Yeah, thanks very much for drawing attention also to the complications or the complexity maybe that needs to be considered. Eric, you want to say also reply to the question or?
Just very quickly that it's sort of absurd that when we are in dialogue with companies that they should not engage in corporate activities with an occupying power on an occupied land in disregard of the wishes of the locals. Why do we need legal arguments at all? I just find it so fascinating that these companies don't use very common sense and understand that this is not some activity we shouldn't do. It's just absurd that we have to deal with the law in the first place, because it's so, I mean, so obvious. They would say, oh, this is international law. That doesn't apply to us. We're a company. Well, this is EU treaty law. It has to do with European relations with Morocco. We're just a private company. We relate to our domestic law here in Finland or whatever. And that is not right to self-determination. That has something to do with General Assembly resolutions. That doesn't apply to us. It's so weird that they don't... Some companies would abstain. We have many companies that abstain, and they would abstain even on the pure ethics of it. And then you have some companies that would understand that an international law violation has been committed. We don't want to help that, so they would do the international law argument and say we don't want to assist in that. But it's just weird that we have to come. But maybe this is going to be interesting. Will we get to a tipping point where the legal risk argument becomes so relevant for the companies that this will make them abstain? That is going to be so interesting. And maybe we will not ever... The problem with our most successful campaigns is that we don't know when we have succeeded because we have avoided companies to go in the first place. And maybe we'll get to that point where companies will abstain from tenders. They don't want to bid on a Moroccan offer. They don't want to receive French foreign aid to go there because they themselves see the risk. And so some of the most successful campaigns maybe we will never, or results we maybe never see because we won before we got there.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric, also for your thoughts, sharing your thoughts. I'd like to open the panel, I'd say. If you from the audience have questions, comments, remarks, you're invited to share them with us. You can either speak in English or in German, both is possible. We have translation here. Are there any questions or comments from your side? Because there's so much knowledge here on the stage, so use the possibility to ask or comment something.
Yeah, hello, good evening. Thank you so much for these great insights about the different aspects of the illegal occupation of Western Sahara. I have a question actually for Eric, because it's an argument you usually hear in relation to occupied territories and resources from occupied territories. Well, if we don't trade with them, other people will trade with them. And what would you say to that? Because, I mean, you mentioned, well, the Russians are there, the Mexicans are there, other countries are there. So if the Europeans pull out, won't just other countries just go there and replace the Europeans, and the situation will remain the same? And we won't benefit from all that green energy? I mean, that's, it's an argument you often hear also in relation to other. I just wanted to have your arguments, your response to that.
It's a very valid question in many ways. It's something we hear a lot. Something that's fascinating with the dynamics of the world we are in is that media, civil society, finance is very global. So it means if someone else goes in, they might also be on the stock exchange. They might also be, actually in the end, owned by German banks. They might be vulnerable to local civil society pressure in those countries. So we've had success in kicking off Chinese companies on the phosphate trade, for instance. So if someone else picks up, we might have someone there to help. What's important in that context, I think, when it comes to because also when it comes to the boycott idea, when we sit on the outside and we judge how some sort of a boycott similar situation would have an effect on the ground, it's so crucial to listen to the people on the ground. It is not up to us to judge what would be the best strategy for the people on the ground. those are the people who should decide it. And if the people, if the majority population of South Africa does not want a European company to come in and do businesses, it's up to them to decide how to deal with it, right? It's not up to us to say if we don't do it, someone else will do it. It's a moral question that we give the agency, the decision to the people of South Africa or Western Sahara to decide themselves how they want it. And they don't want it, so it's easy. If someone else comes in, it's still, we follow their advice. Yeah, anyway. That was a very peculiar story. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Are there any other questions or comments from your side? Yes. Microphone here.
I'll ask in English. I have two questions. One for Najat. Which forms or kinds of resistance are there, and which ones are present in the Western Sahara, and how is it like? How do they express themselves, like on an individual as well as collective level? And then another question concerning Algeria, like which role do they play in this whole conflict, and in which ways does it relate to Morocco and Europe?
Ich antworte die erste Frage sure und die zweite Frage, ich weiß nicht, ob das an mich auch gerichtet oder an alle. Ja, also wie die Leute ihre Resistenz organisieren. Also es gibt die Frente Polisario, die seit 50 Jahren als Befreiungsbewegung vor Ort aktiv ist, die verschiedene Etappen durchgegangen ist durch ihre lange Befreiungsaktivitäten, angefangen vom bewaffneten Krieg gegen die spanische Kolonialmacht, was auch fortgesetzt wurde nach der Invasion Marokko 1975 bis 1991. 1991 gab es einen Waffenstillstand, vereinbart, unterschrieben von beiden Konfliktsparteien. Das ist die Frente Polisario und das Königreich Marokko. Dieser Waffenstillstand gilt bis Ende 2020, genau gesagt am 13. November 2020. Dann hat Marokko diesen Waffenstillstand abgebrochen, indem marokkanische Streitkräfte einmarschiert sind und neue Teile des Territoriums besetzt haben und Menschen, die friedlich dort demonstriert hatten, eingegriffen. Das führte dazu, dass die Frente Polisario sich von dem Waffenstillstand danach distanziert, denn Marokko hat das ja de facto schon gemacht. Und seitdem gibt es auch militärische Auseinandersetzungen, hauptsächlich entlang der Mauer, die ich vorhin erwähnt habe, die Mauer der Schande, die das ganze Land teilt vom Norden bis Süden. Es gibt eine andere Art auch andere Art der Widerstand, die sich aber hauptsächlich in den besetzten Gebieten konzentriert. Ich habe vorhin erwähnt, dass die Menschen, die in den besetzten Gebieten leben, leben unter schwieriger Situation, haben weniger Rechte, sei es politische oder soziale oder wirtschaftliche Rechte. Und diese Menschen versuchen natürlich auch gegen die Besatzung zu kämpfen. Man muss die Situation verstehen, also es gibt kein Recht, sich zu versammeln, es gibt kein Recht, sich zu organisieren. Jeder, der sich eigentlich klar und deutlich allein für Selbstbestimmungsrecht, wir reden gar nicht über die Unabhängigkeit. Wenn jemand sich dafür einsetzt, wird man halt verhaftet, gefoltert. Und das Einzige, was die Leute dort machen, sind Demonstrationen, die oft brutal zerschlagen sind. Oder wenn sie das organisieren können, in Ausland zu gehen, die wenige die das dürfen, um aufmerksam auf die Situation die Welt zu machen. Mittlerweile und dank dem Internet konnte man auch einiges schon erfahren. Es gibt ganz aktive junge Leute, zum Beispiel es gibt so die Equipe Media als Beispiel, eine Gruppe, die versucht hat, dort Aktivitäten zu dokumentieren und auch das nach draußen zu publizieren. Aber die Situation dort ist sehr, sehr schwierig. Ich möchte nur daran denken, an die Musikgefangene. Wir haben eine große Gruppe von jungen Männern, die seit mehr als 10 Jahren verhaftet sind in Marokko, zum Teil lebenslänglich verurteilt. Und das ist nur, weil sie friedlich demonstriert haben, eine Zeltlager 18 Kilometer entfernt von der Stadt El Aaiún aufgebaut haben, um für ihre soziale und politische Rechte zu kämpfen. Das ist nur, um zu sehen, wie schwierig eigentlich dort einen Widerstand zu leisten. Wir, die Saharaui, die das Land verlassen haben, oder die danach geboren sind, befinden sich meistens in den Flüchtlingslagern. Dort organisieren sie sich, die Saharaui, sozial, politisch, bauen einen Staat im Exil, als Teil dieser Resistenz auch, trotz aller Schwierigkeiten, und halt der bewaffnete Krieg in den befreiten Zone von Saharauischen Militär. Also diese Resistenz hat viele Gesichter, weil wir einfach auf alle Fronten kämpfen wollen. Eine dieser Fronten ist ja die juristische Front, die wir heute erfahren. Ja. Bezüglich Algerien, ich kann nicht für Algerien sprechen, aber ich weiß, dass Algerien uns sehr stark unterstützt. Schon während des Befreiungskampfes gegen die spanische Kolonialmächte bis heute. Ich weiß aber auch, dass Algerien alle Befreiungsbewegungen in der Welt unterstützt hat. Und es ist normal, dass sie uns unterstützt, weil wir sind direkt vor ihrer Tür. In Algerien gibt es Flüchtlingslager seit 50 Jahren. Und dort gibt es viele Unterstützer, aber der Hauptunterstützer natürlich ist Algerien. Sonst wären diese Flüchtlingslager, flüchtige Menschen, die 1975 im Winter vor der algerischen Grenze kamen, gar nicht mehr überleben. Das war eine ganz schwierige Zeit, aber dank der Unterstützung Algerien spielt eine große Rolle dabei. Marokko versucht immer Algerien als ein Teil dieses Konflikts heranzuziehen. Ich glaube, auch dieser Beschluss, was ich vorhin gesagt habe, hat deutlich und klar gemacht, wer sind die Konfliktsparteien. Wer muss gefragt werden? Das sind das saharauische Volk. Und also das führt natürlich zu Schwierigkeiten mit Marokko, aber Marokko hat Schwierigkeiten auch mit Mauretanien und mit Spanien. Das ist kein Sonderfall. 2021 hat es mit Spanien, mit Deutschland, mit Frankreich bis kurzem. Also Marokko ist Meister in sowas. Und es gibt Länder, die danach auch einen Kniefall machen. Es gibt andere, die weiter ihre Prinzipien verfolgen. Da gehört Algerien dazu.
Okay, thank you, Nared. There's another question. Okay.
I would like to hear more about possible international reactions on the new justice results, like African Union and UN.
Actually, you're right. I forgot to mention that there was a case that was brought by an individual before the African Court on People's and Human Rights, because the human rights system in Africa allows individuals to bring claims on someone else's behalf. And so that was a citizen from Ghana, I think, that brought the claim before the court when Morocco asked to be admitted as a member state of the African Union. And the lawyer used a loophole to bring to the court a couple of states that recognize the jurisdiction of the court, saying, basically a simple argument, you should have raised the issue of the occupation of Western Sahara when Morocco asked to be admitted in the African Union, because in the constitutive charter of the African Union, you have the right to self-determination, right to peace, etc., etc. That case was brought. The Sahrawi government and other government decided to intervene in the proceedings. I participated myself as the advisor of the Sahrawi government. And the ruling is extremely interesting, and really it counterbalances the rulings in Europe. In two directions, the court rules, so there are plenty of discussions regarding the admissibility of the claim, but on the content, the court rules that the presence of Morocco in Western Sahara is an occupation according to the African Union and the United Nations. That's the first time that actually you have such pronouncement in a court ruling. Then the court rules that that occupation violates the right to self-determination and independence of the Sahrawi people. And there, for me, that's a very interesting finding that echoes directly to the rulings, the opinion, the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on Palestine, that declared the Israeli occupation of Palestine illegal, unlawful under international, because it violates the right to self-determination. The third aspect, the court ruled that all EU member states, including Morocco, including the supporters of Morocco, have an obligation not to recognize and not to assist the Moroccan occupation of Western Sahara. We used that ruling in the proceedings before the European Court of Justice because if you want, that's the two faces of the same coin. If you take the angle from the perspective of the European Union, you want involvement in Western Sahara, you need Sahrawi consent. From the perspective of the ruling of the African courts, there is no issue of consent, that's not in the ruling. That's the court base its reasoning only on the obligation of non-recognition, non-assistance. So as a third party, make sure that you have no involvement at all in the occupied part of Western Sahara. And so for me, when you look at the litigation, you really see consolidation of the legal claims of the Sahrawi people, because they had in the past the advisory opinion from the International Court of 75, but now there are several rulings of the European Court of Justice, rulings in South Africa, and the ruling in the African courts. And so you can really tell that the political situation is complicated. You talked about the support of certain governments to the Moroccan claims, but legally speaking, the case of Western Sahara has never been that strong. The question is, how do we turn that legal result into tangible results?
Hey, thank you very much, Manuel. Okay, there's one, if you can have time for one last question or comment, and there's another one. Okay, maybe we take the two questions together, and
Good evening. I'm always a fan to see both sides. I don't agree that Morocco is a country which has a conflict with all neighbors, just like that. And Morocco was the first country who accepted United States and has very good relations with Israel, United States, and I don't think Morocco is a country, every country has problems with the neighbors. If we see Germany, if we see other countries, it's normal, okay? So I don't think Morocco is closed or is a conflict country who's looking for conflicts first. And the other question is, are there some Moroccan prisoners in West Sahara? The other side. Just a question. Thank you very much.
thank you. I think we're going to take the other question as well. There was one other question, right? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Ja, danke erstmal für den Vortrag, danke euch allen, danke für die Moderation. Ich muss sagen, ich habe eine Anmerkung und eine Frage. Ich hänge noch ein bisschen bei der Geschichte von vorhin. Ich habe so sehr viel Lachen im Raum wahrgenommen. Ich muss sagen, mir ist das Lachen total vergangen und ich habe eher einen Kloß im Hals bekommen und Schwere in meiner Brust, wenn ich darüber nachdenke, dass wir in dem westlichen Standard, in dem wir uns heute befinden und das ganze Gut und die Eigentümer und Materialien, die wir haben hier in der Gesellschaft, und es finden immer noch Gespräche statt, in dem weiße Männer über das afrikanische Volk, weiße Männer über das saharauische Volk bestimmen, über die, wem was gehört, dass wir heute darüber sprechen, dass wir für das saharauische Volk fordern, dass die Zustimmung über die Ausbeutung von den Ressourcen, dass nach Zustimmung gefragt wird, ist eigentlich total verrückt, weil es sind eigenständige Menschen, es sind eigenständige Existenzen und Familien, die gar nicht erst in die Position gebracht werden müssen, wo sie ihr Lebensrecht verteidigen müssen. Es gibt sehr Kolonialismus. Ich glaube, eine Sache, die wir uns oft mehr vor Augen halten sollen, dass es, obwohl wir gelernt haben, dass das alles vergangen ist, es ist nicht, es sind dieselben Umstände, vieles findet einfach nur in der modernen Gesellschaft statt, aber die ganze Bevölkerung wird weiterhin ausgebeutet und unterdrückt. Und meine Frage ist, als offensichtlich Person, die in Deutschland lebt, die im Westen lebt, die aufgrund der Ausbeutung afrikanischer Bevölkerung viele Privilegien und Vorteile in diesem Land hat. Wie können wir das saharauische Volk von hier unterstützen? Wie können wir weiter Platz schaffen, dass der Struggle gesehen wird, gehört wird? Können wir bestimmte Sachen boykottieren? Können wir bestimmte Gruppen unterstützen? Ich denke, I would urge everybody that has the financial situation to support fundings, to support activists, support them. Ich als junge Studentin kann leider finanziell nicht sehr viel unterstützen. Was sind unsere Möglichkeiten? Also wie können wir heute hier rausgehen und wissen, wie wir das saharauische Volk unterstützen können?
Yeah, vielen Dank. Thank you very much for the question and comments. Who of you would like to react on that?
Vielen Dank für die Frage. Ich werde sie nochmal wiederholen, damit ich sicher bin, dass ich sie richtig verstanden habe. Also Ihre Frage, oder der letzte Teil Ihrer Frage ist, ob marokkanische Gefangene in der Westsahara sind. Sie meinen in den Flüchtlingslagern?
Richtig.
Es gibt kein einziger marokkanischer Gefangener. Die letzten Gefangenen wurden freigelassen in Abkommen im Rahmen dieses Friedensplan, und sie sind von Internationalem Rotes Kreuz. Der letzte Flieger war mit Unterstützung Deutschlands. Die sind alle jetzt zu Hause. Es gibt keine marokkanische Gefangene. Wenn Sie marokkanische Gefangene meinen, damit hier die Leute das auch verstehen, das sind Kriegsgefangene. Weil sonst haben wir ja keine Marokkaner im Flüchtlingslager. Das sind Kriegsgefangene, die im Laufe der Zeit, während des Krieges von 1975 bis 1991 in Gefangenschaft genommen wurden, und es gab im Rahmen dieses Friedensplan den Austausch von Gefangenen, und es kamen 66 saharauische Gefangene raus. Wir haben immer noch viele Vermisste und ungefähr über 3000 marokkanische Soldaten, die freigelassen wurden. Das sind die Gefangenen, die wir während des Krieges hatten, und die 66 sind angeblich auch das alles, was Marokko hat während dieser ungefähr 16 Jahre. Ja, ein Kommentar über die gute Beziehung zu Marokko, zu seinen Nachbarn. Ich möchte nur sagen, Marokko hat de facto geografisch eigentlich direkt mit Landbeziehung nur ein Nachbar, nur Algerien, und die Beziehungen sind nicht die beste. Südlich ist Westsahara, Marokko besetzt Westsahara. Die Beziehung kann nicht schlechter sein, als ein Land besetzt das andere. Ja, und sonst hat Marokko keine direkte Nachbarschaft. hat Spanien natürlich auf der anderen Seite, und ich glaube, da brauche ich nicht zu sagen. Die Beziehung zwischen Marokko und Spanien, diese ambivalente Beziehungen, die man besser, mal schlechter, es hängen viele Themen, die Migration, Ceuta und Melilla und so weiter. Also, ich glaube nicht, dass ich hier Marokko ungerecht getan habe, indem ich gesagt habe, er hat keine gute Beziehungen mit den Nachbarn. Das nächste Land ist Mauretanien, hat auch nicht die beste Beziehung mit Marokko, weil Marokko nämlich Anspruch auch auf Mauretanien hatte, jahrelang. Und Anspruch auf Teil Algerien. Also die Grenzen Marokko sind nicht klar. Zwar international klar, aber für Marokko sind die nicht klar, und das schafft immer Probleme. Und immer wieder. Ja, das ist, glaube ich, damit ist Ihre Frage beantwortet. Wie wir helfen können, glaube ich, da können wir alle was dazu sagen. Danke für die Frage nochmal. Ich glaube, wir die Saharaui, wir brauchen Unterstützung in viele Bereiche, und wenn wir hier in Deutschland sind und wir sehen, wir brauchen ganz dringend Unterstützung in Öffentlichkeitsarbeit. Das kostet nicht viel Geld, das kostet nur die Wille. Und das ist erstmal sehr wichtig, weil solange die Menschen nicht informiert sind, solange die Menschen über den Konflikt kaum was wissen, werden sie auch nicht zu einer zweiten Aktion gehen oder weitergehen. Also Information und Information und Information, damit wir einfach diese mediale Blockade, die nicht zufällig ist, brechen können. Und da können alle Leute helfen. Ansonsten gibt es Projekte, wir sind bei Medico International, dann kannst du wahrscheinlich eher dazu was sagen. Gibt es Projekte, die man hier auch unterstützen kann. Wir organisieren Reisen in den Flüchtlingslager, um die Situation direkt vor Ort kennenzulernen. Wir motivieren immer die Leute, die besetzten Gebiete zu besuchen. Es ist schwierig, wenn Marokko das nicht zulässt, aber es ist ein Versuch wert. Ja, das ist erstmal, was mir jetzt auf die Schnelle einfällt.
Yeah, nice question or comment at the end. And there are so many things that need to be done. It takes a bit of time, but the first step is to learn as much. If someone wants to help on the Western Sahara issue, the first step is to learn as much as possible. The more you study it, the more upset you get, the more angry you get of the hypocrisy of the behavior of our governments, talking about, how dare they talk about international law in Ukraine? How dare they? And they ignore it in Western Sahara. I don't understand it. So the more you study Western Sahara, the more angry you get. There's so much that needs to be done in reaching out to companies, to shareholders, to trade unions, to shops, supermarkets. I don't believe too much in boycott. We are not many enough to make an effect. It's a nice thing to talk about, it's a nice thing to do to educate your friends, but it's much more efficient spending that time on writing an elegant letter to the supermarket and try to engage, try to inform about the ruling and ask how are you adapting to that ruling. So it's a bit more academic, it's a bit more, that's at least how we work on shaping passive-aggressive letters. And it's super interesting. The more technical it gets, the more at least interesting I think we're having it. In Germany there's a network of people working on the resources, on the companies. Emma is sitting here, she's part of the German team working on resources particularly. We also work in many countries. If you have outreach contacts in other countries, we're really keen on getting to know anyone with time at their hand who want to help. And we can talk after the event. So we really need more people.
Well, just quickly, I was about to comment on the ruling that we got from on the issue of the labeling. I think that's one angle, to make sure that the products are properly labeled. And on that aspect, I want to emphasize that's not only an issue of free choice for the consumer, that's a marketing standard. And so according to EU law, if the origin is not properly marked on the product, it cannot be sold at all in retailers. On what can be done to help the cause, from my tiny window, as a lawyer that is involved on Western Sahara, but that has interest and sometimes is involved in other situations. I'm thinking about Palestine, but also New Caledonia, that is under French rule, and some event happened that year. I'm thinking also about the question of Mayotte, that is a Comoro island that is occupied by France. I always see the same patterns by the colonizer that is playing with the terminology. And so I think that one of the core issue and one of the things that we fought very much in court and outside the court, that's when you refer to the question of Western Sahara, use the proper words. I still see politicians sometimes within the European Parliament that are sensitive to the cause of Western Sahara, that are talking about consultations and the local population. But that's the language of the Commission of France. That's not the language, and even now that's even easier because we have court rulings. And so for me, you should have just a couple of terms. It should be very clear in your mind that when it comes to Western Sahara, you should refer to the Sahrawi people as a people and to the consent of the Sahrawi people. For me, the key is really about the consent, because it echoes directly to the right to self-determination, that is the right to choose. And so any process in Western Sahara that does not reflect the genuine and free will of the Sahrawi people has nothing to do with consent. So from my perspective, as a lawyer, very sensitive to the issue of terminology, make sure that when you talk about Western Sahara, you're using the proper words.
Okay, thank you very much for this important question that I think is an activated or an end of the event, I would say, that can encourage us or motivate us to do something. Before we close the discussion, I would just like to point out a few things. First of all, maybe you've seen already the photographs here on the wall. I would like to invite you to take the chance to have a look at the images of Maria Klenner. She did this ongoing photographic work, which called We Will Be Many, about the resistance, but also about the liberation struggle of the Sahrawian people. And you can see photos of the occupied territory of Western Sahara, which have been taken in the early 2024. And then you find at the back a table with a lot of information of the different networks, organizations that have been involved in organizing this event, this evening. And there's also a contact list, for example, for a Western Sahara Network newsletter, but there's also the contact list for the Medico newsletter if you would like to be informed about further events, further work of Medico International. And then you have the choice between two different donation boxes where you could leave some money if you have some, either for the Western Sahara Network or for Medico International, because those events here, they also cost money, and we always need support for the ongoing work. And then finally, there's a guest book, because we're gonna have next week a meeting with the Foreign Office of Germany, and we will have a conversation with them about of German politics and German position on the situation of Western Sahara, and we will have a meeting. And if you have any questions, any comments you would like us to ask them, you feel free to write them in the guest book. And then I would really like to thank all of you for coming here, for the important statements you made. It was a fruitful and very interesting discussion, I think. Thanks for coming and taking the time. Thank you also for being here. But also I would like to draw the attention to the invisible work that has been done by the technicians. Thanks very much for organizing and preparing the whole room, by the translation and the interpretation in the back, and all the people that have been involved organizing the event. And I wish you a good evening. You can still stay here, have some drinks. The pastel is still open. Thank you very much.